What if the life you've been dreaming of isn't as far away as you think? Welcome to the Transforming Lives Panel podcast, where real stories meet radical change. With hosts Charmin Prince and Mitzi Down.
Together, they bringing you unfiltered conversations with trailblazers, experts, and everyday people who've turned their struggles into strength. No fluff, just the tools and mindset shifts you need to rewrite your story.
Whether you're stuck in your career, relationships, or personal growth, consider this your wake-up call. Press play on transformation. Come on, dive in.
Welcome to the Transforming Lives Panel podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Charmin.
And I'm your other host, Mitzi Down.
And before we continue, just join us in a brief breathing exercise so that we can be grounded together. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it at the top. Exhale through your mouth. In through your nose. And out through your mouth. Again, take a deep inhale. And as you exhale, let go of everything that happened today that did not serve you. Take another deep breath in and hold it. And think about the things that serve you. And relax into the energy of those things. One last deep breath. Hold that. And then let it go. Thank you for joining us in that brief grounding exercise. I hope that it served you as it did for me. I was able to let go of the things that didn't serve me today, and I'm sure that you did too. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest, Mitch Webb. Join me in welcoming Mitch to the Transforming Lives Panel podcast. And would you introduce yourself for us?
Absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to join you ladies. And I was listening to a podcast that you guys did before hopping on, and I was hoping we were going to do some breathing and some centering. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Okay, Mitch. So I'll just jump right into it. What was the personal experience that led you to specialize in nervous system health coaching?
Oh, man. Great question. You know, I would say it's a series of dark nights of the soul. But, you know, when you ask that question, the first thing that pops to my head when it comes to the nervous system, I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got a local men's group that meets once a month. And maybe 2 years ago, I got approached by two of my buddies, and they wanted to do this group. And I remember thinking, I'm going to be the guy that joins the group and helps people with mental health issues. Because at the time, I assumed that all mental health issues were nutritional deficiencies. And it's interesting, which is radically different than how I look at it now, obviously. That's really demonstrating how I came to the work. And also, I was reading the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I remember getting to the childhood trauma part, and I slammed the book. I was like almost ashamed to consider that my childhood could have been traumatic. Being that my parents provided for me, you know, pretty well off family and sent me to college and put a roof over my head and paid for things. And, you know, I thought, who am I to question that? And I was sharing that in the men's group, and there was a question about my dad, and I worked with him at one point, and I answered it very immaturely, like a little boy would. And one of the guys pulled me aside at the end, and he goes, "Hey, man, you reading that book, The Body Keeps the Score." He's like, "Do you know what trauma is?" And I'm like, "Not really." And he was like, "Well, the way that you answered that question let me know that there's probably some there for you." And he introduced me to a therapist, and as I have been doing for 20 years, I was looking for answers and trying to understand the chronic disease symptoms that I was dealing with. And it's something that had never crossed my mind. And man, I was paying attention after that, and it changed my life.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. There's so many nuggets in what you just shared. You mentioned one of my favorite books of all times, The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Van der Kolk. And I really believe that everyone should read that book, right?
Totally.
And another author popped in my head. It's Peter Levine. I don't know if you're aware of him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I am so excited that you joined the group, and here is your perspective, and you have been transformed in such a way that you became an expert at the nervous system. I want to talk about that because the nervous system, most times when we hear about trauma, we don't talk about the impact on the nervous system, right? And how it affects the nervous system and how the nervous system affects the entire body.
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk a little about that?
And just when you're talking about it, if you could just sort of also address physical trauma being held or emotional trauma or both in this context for our listeners.
I'm going to throw trauma all into one bucket. There's so many different forms: shock traumas, early developmental trauma, in utero trauma, generational trauma, emotional trauma, physical trauma, illness trauma, misattunement. That's more early developmental stuff. But yeah, trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. And I think if you're a human, it's really hard to go through this life without picking up some hitchhikers, some things. And to define trauma, I think it's an adaptation after we have experienced something that is overwhelming to our system that we don't have the capacity to respond to. And so an example would be, I'm a child and I'm being abused and it's my caretaker. And so I'm not going to fight them and I can't run away. And if I can't fight, I can't flee, and then my next option is to shut down. And that's the freeze response. And when we don't complete the stress response, we don't run away, we don't fight, we don't say no. That incomplete memory, that it's an implicit memory is what you would call it. It gets stored in the nervous system. That's the body keeps the score. So the body is holding that experience. And that's how someone can be anxious all the time and hypervigilant, like the world is a bad place and it's out to get me. And that's because their system believes that threat is still there because it hasn't been completed. The universe might have a sick and twisted way of bringing those types of experience that are familiar to trigger those responses in the body so that we can heal them. And so if that's someone that's experiencing that means your body is safe enough and it's ready and willing to see these things that were completely overwhelming and impossible because we didn't have the tools or the ability to deal with at the time. And then going to your question about how it affects the nervous system, our window of tolerance, that's where we feel really good and we're creative and we say, I am me and I'm relaxed and I can be in a relationship and hold a job and function really well with my body. And when we are in a stressful situation, it's prolonged. Our body comes out of that window of tolerance. It goes into a really high activation and our body is always healing or adapting. And so it sees that we're in this prolonged stress and it goes, hey, we got to help this guy out here. He's going to run this thing into a wall. He's going to redline and we're going to not have the resources to function. And so so we're in this activation. I'm going to bring this clamp on. That's a protective mechanism. It's a branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. It's called high tone dorsal. And so that's like playing possum. So you see an animal faking dead. Well, that's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, if I can just make myself really small, I can shut down. Hopefully this threat passes. But what happens is when that environment in the wild, you see an animal get chased by another animal, and if it gets away, it looks around, it orients to its new environment, it sees that there's no longer a threat, and it shakes it off and it goes back to living its life. Well, humans, with our society, the way we're taught is that anxiety's bad. Fear is something to be avoided, and we do these things on our own. We don't reach out for help because that means you're weak. And so our body learns this pattern of shutting down when there's something overwhelming. And so eventually that becomes a dysregulated nervous system that goes from, really high activation to shutting down. And there's different symptoms associated with both. And a lot of people that come to this work are going to kind of be one of two in a dysregulated picture. And that's going to be, I feel too much and I'm super anxious all the time, or I have IBS or different gut stuff. Things are running through me. Or I'm shut down and I've created this false window of tolerance, this bubble that I can live in where I'm shut down, but I'm not really experiencing life and I'm not feeling anything. And that may be things like autoimmune and depression and symptoms like that. So after doing this for 20 years, looking for root cause, looking at the nutrition, looking at the detox, all these things, the nervous system is connected to so many systems of the body. And if that is dysfunctional, well, then all of these systems are going to be constantly affected. I think that a good chunk, if not all of dis-ease has got a root in trauma.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add, I'm sure Mitzi has a comment, but I just wanted to add that research just added a fourth response. It's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And this new response, they say it's that survival mechanism in us that prior to pleasing the predators to avoid the conflict and feel safe. And that is why we have so many people pleasers.
Yes.
That's the end result of fawn. And you also mention how mammals in the wild, when they escape the predator, what they do and they shake. I'm a TRE provider, so he spoke my language because Dr. Berselli created TRE, and it's called trauma and tension releasing exercises, where you elicit the neurogenic tremors in the body and release the stress and trauma because, they're on the same continuum. So I am really enjoying this. Thank you. And over to you, Mitzi.
It's really interesting as you were sort of talking about that. I was thinking, I've seen my cats kind of like, some scares them, but then they do that kind of shaking it off. So when you were saying that, it was like, and when my daughter gets stressed, she starts to fly. When she was younger, especially, she was kind of, her hands would go and and I figured it was, part of her coping mechanism. So when you come to the realization, and I've always said, no one gets through life unscathed. I mean, everybody's journey has some bumps in the road for sure. So we all have the trauma. How do you help someone process their trauma or get through it so that it is not holding them back and so that they can, so to speak, be all that they can be? Like, what is the process like? What does it look like dealing with it?
Yeah, great question. Getting rid of trauma, it's more like, or how do we work with it? It's coming back to ourself, right? It's like trauma disconnects us from ourself and we start to identify with our protective mechanisms, our people pleasing, our perfection, our black or white thinking, our intellectualization, going into our head and living there and thinking our way to safety. If you're someone who's recognizing that it's something that my therapist said, it's not really about the trauma. I think it's important to understand where these things came from, but ultimately reliving that, I think it can be re-traumatized. It was for me. And so it's not about the thing and what happened and getting it out as much as how have we adapted to these stressful situations, and how have these patterns, these protective patterns, gotten in the way of, like you said, being the best version of ourselves. And so if we can see that, so I love the, if you can see it, you don't have to be it. So it all starts with awareness. And from that standpoint of, hey, I understand there's something going on here. I don't feel like myself and I'd like to heal this. For someone like me that was very much a biohacker and a fixer and being a health coach, I had every tool in the book, and I was really quick to rush in and fix things. And what I'm learning now is the body, it's healing or adapting. It already knows how to heal. And some of these, if we're doing biohacks and detoxes and gut treatments and all these things, and we're relying on external resources, we're missing it. And so you can get some really good help from those things. I'm not knocking that at all. But the real healing happens when we listen to our intuition and our gut. Trauma separates us from that. And so where I start is building capacity in the nervous system. And that always starts with safety. And it always starts with building a relationship with yourself and the parts that we have pushed away, that we have been told or by others or deemed unacceptable, not allowed. So it's like this, those symptoms would get our attention. That is our younger self knocking at the door, pleading for our attention, begging to come in from the cold and the rain that's outside. And we're slamming that door every time. Nope, nope. I want to push that down. I want to avoid it. And so the healing process is opening that door, moving towards that. Now, to do that, we have to build the capacity to be with the intensity of those sensations and those symptoms. And we got to feel safe first. And so we're going to start really small. Things like orienting, following your impulse, things about getting curious and learning to sit with emotions, and really doing that in a co-regulated space where we can build safety and know that no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. And that's a process, and it's kind of difficult sometimes because society has options for mental health, and that looks like a quick fix like Xanax, and then we have this work of doing the trauma work and building capacity and learning to regulate and becoming your own medicine. And so it may look like a combination of those things in the beginning, and titrating and going really slow and making sure we're not doing too much. And along those lines, learning to set boundaries and say no and rest and say, I've done enough today. And all kinds of stuff is going to shift in your relationship. And so I can't reiterate enough going slow. I'm someone who got their butt kicked running and into this thing, wanting to have the big cathartic release just because of my past. And that's how I looked at health. And so we got to slow things way down and really get curious without judgment and create a lot of awareness around ourself and our protective mechanisms, our parts, our sensations, our emotions, and yeah, it's quite the journey, and it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done for my health in 20 years of looking for root cause.
Thank you so much for that, Mitch. You mentioned the nervous system. You mentioned starting slowly, feeling safe. But for example, someone who has had complex trauma for most of their lives, how do you help that person who really hasn't seen a way out of where they are? How do you help them to feel safe and to start the healing process?
Well, I am that person. I have complex trauma, and I went my entire life without knowing what safety is. And some approaches that didn't work for me were throwing me into EMDR right away, or trying to work on a big shock trauma that I knew was there. I think digging and going after it, even though we may know some of those experiences, that's not where to start. From my perspective, it's going to meet them where they're at. When I was more health coaching prior to this, more of this nervous system approach, it was like, let me tell you my sequential order of doing things. First, we're going to work on your diet, and then we're going to work on your mindset, and then we're going to work on exercise. And really, I was teaching people how to, it's all distraction, if it's not meant for them. And so what I try to do now, and what I learned from my mentor, Irene Lyon, is meeting the moment and not coming in with an agenda. Me coming in with an agenda as a practitioner is like shooting you, forcing you, and saying, you got to do it my way. It's really a dialogue, understanding where do you want to go with this? What's your goal? And getting really clear on that. And then for me, some people aren't ready to do the emotional work. So I'm not even going to know that from their language. And if I can sit back and watch them and really listen instead of listening to give an answer, then I'll hear what they need. I have a lady I was working with this week, and the thing that's going to make her feel really confident right now is eating good food and having that prepared when she gets home. That's safety for her. And so that's what we worked on. So we're going to build confidence. And it's great for the body to get ample nutrition. So many people are walking around forgetting it's time to eat or drink water. And if that's what's going on, then we need to start in that place. If that's something like low-hanging fruit is what I would call that. So through conversation and rapport and building that trust with the client, they're going to tell me what they need. And if you want to talk about it from a nervous system standpoint, someone that is really overwhelmed, we're going to start with the orienting and just learning to be here in our environment and feel our butt in the chair, use our senses to bring us into the moment. And that can be really scary for people. So it's really important that we titrate, that we do little bits. Oh, and this, as I say that, I think education is probably where I would start, actually. So it's education and safety. And some people are more heady like myself and intellectualizers, and they really want to understand what the nervous system is and what trauma is and how that functions, so that when something different happens, instead of being afraid of it, we go, oh, look at this. My body is healing. And so that brings a little bit of trust and a little bit of curiosity. And then that's something that we can discuss and build capacity off. And I'll tell you a quick story about me and how that worked out with education. I was telling it earlier today, and it had to do with toxic shame. When we've had toxic shame, the antidote for toxic shame is disgust. Kathy Kane would say, we got to smell the dead rat. And what that means is like we look at ourselves like spoiled meat, like we're bad, something's wrong with me. And when we can start to hear how we're talking to ourselves, well, you didn't come into this world with toxic shame. Somebody put that there. So where'd you learn that? So that may be. And so when I was reading about emotionally immature parents and thinking about some situations from my childhood, things finally became very clear. I was able to articulate that to my wife about some experiences I had, and that made me sick to my stomach. And I went and threw up in the toilet. And she's very concerned, and she's going, what's going on here? And I am just cheering. I'm so excited. I said, this is amazing. I said, this is toxic shame. When I get done with this, I'll tell you all about it. So education it builds that neuroplasticity that we need to change. And I think education is the foundation. And then we can go into some of these other things I mentioned at first.
Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, that was a lot. And I say that because I'm sure for some, this might be the first time they heard of toxic shame, right?
How would you define toxic shame? Okay, so guilt is I did something bad. Toxic shame is I am bad.
Mhm.
Who I am and what I am is no good. It's bad. That's why I said it's spoiled meat. We think we're rotten down to the core.
Yeah.
And you may say, it may sound like, I'm too much. I'm not enough. I got my You Are Enough shirt on here. It may be, I'm bad. I'm damaged good. There's something wrong with me, and yeah, that comes from outside of us. I don't think that comes from inside of us.
Yeah. Like toxic shame, we can say that it is identifying with the trauma or as the trauma.
Yep.
Thus, when you give that wonderful example of throwing up, that was a big release. That was freedom from
Yeah.
toxic shame. So, what a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing your personal story because that's impactful. And go ahead, Mitzi.
Oh, there was like so much there in it, and it's fabulous. And one of the things that I'm thinking back to is at the very beginning that you said that, when you initially thought about your childhood and everything, it's like I didn't have trauma. Like I had parents who were good, I had a roof over my head. And so, but then when you started looking at things from a different viewpoint or stuff, you realized that there were obviously some major traumas within your life. And can you kind of talk to that a little bit too? Because it must be something that I did to myself. You know what I'm saying? Like just maybe if you can kind of elaborate on that little aspect of it, because I think that that is probably something a lot of people don't realize that they've had a trauma.
Oh, it was the journey for me to see that and to accept that. I like to start where my mind goes to explain that is in childhood, I think we need three things, and I'm sure we need more, but the three that I've learned about would be unconditional love, safety, and authenticity. And if one of those or all of those are missing, what tends to happen is an environmental failure. Okay, that means my caregivers failed me at taking care of me and meeting my needs as a child, as a human. And so it's impossible for a child to look at their caregivers as incapable or hurtful or even abusive. And so we turn that on ourselves. And that's where the toxic shame comes in. And it says, I'm bad. It's my fault. And so, looking at the environmental failure and the toxic shame that results from that, eventually, when our body's safe enough, we start to unpack that. Does that answer your question? I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second.
It does, because I think that, as you said, you sort of addressed those key issues, which is that feeling unconditional love, safe and secure, and that people are being authentic with you.
And I can expand now. So thank you for that, helping me out there. So for me, as almost a 40-year-old man, realizing this and learning about this, I didn't have any of those in my family. And it's not to say my family and my parents were bad. They're great people. It's their own upbringing, their own conditioning, and they did the best that they could. It just didn't include those things that I needed. My emotions were really big. You can only meet someone emotionally where you've met yourself. And if you don't have the capacity to that, and you've got a child that's very emotional, well, that can be overwhelming for the parent. And so that can shut them down. And instead of meeting them there, they're going to punish you. They're going to send you to your room to be with your emotions. They're going to maybe make fun of you. That certainly is what happened to me. And that was their way of coping. And so now at 40 years old and learning these things, it's like learning a new language. And it's because of neuroplasticity, it's absolutely possible that the education.
Thank you so much, Mitch. It's been a pleasure. And I know that our listeners are going to have to listen to this a few times because there's so much nuggets and healing example, empowerment, and inspiration. Thank you, and we hope that we can invite you again and you'll be willing to show up.
Absolutely. I always tell my friends I'm 2 inches wide and 10 miles deep. I got a many stories. I love chatting with you guys, and it'd be great to come on again. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
If today's episode sparked something in you, don't let it end here. Change starts with action. Hit subscribe and join our community of life chasers.
We want to hear from you. While we don't have social media, you can connect with us through our personal YouTube channels.
Share your biggest takeaway and let us know how you're transforming your life. Remember, your next level life begins the moment you decide to claim it. Until next time, keep transforming.